Hi, welcome back to CBSE Board Economics. I am Saddam Hussain here. So we're carrying on with the British role in the Indian economy. How was the Indian economy during the British period? So we discussed already that they have destroyed Indian agriculture by introducing zamindari system, by not developing agriculture, by not investing in agriculture, by promoting cash crops rather than food crops. And then subsequently we have seen they have destroyed even in the Indian industries, because the main purpose was to make it as a colony, to make it as a feeder economy, to develop their industries in Britain. They never introduced capital goods industries in India. They destroyed systematically all handicraft industries. As a result, people became unemployed, and the people working in the handicraft industries, they had to go back to villages to once again depend on agriculture. And I've already discussed that they never bothered to open capital goods industries. They were looking only for raw materials from India and wanted to sell their produced goods in India. Now today we will be discussing in this exclusive video the role of Britishers, or what was the role of foreign trade during the British rule. The question goes, explain the state of foreign trade during the British rule. Even the foreign trade was not very good during the British rule. I told you their main aim was to establish Indian economy as a colony for their industries. So they never wanted to have a sound foreign trade. The foreign trade policy pursued by the Britishers was only to help their industries, to help their economy. Let's see, under this a few points we'll be discussing: exporter of primary products and importer of finished products under foreign trade policy. The second point, monopoly control of British rule. What exactly is monopoly we'll be discussing in detail. And the last point, drain of Indian wealth. So let's say foreign trade policy during the British period. The first point you have, exporter of primary products and importer of finished products. I've already discussed when we were discussing Indian agriculture during the British rule, when we were discussing about industries during the British rule. Of course, in consequence of this, the foreign policy also depends. So Indian economy, or they treated as a colony, so the main purpose of the colony was to run the industries in England, not the industries in India. So the main purpose of the colony was to supply raw materials to the industries in England or Britain. So the exports from India were only primary products, primary goods, raw materials such as cotton, jute, silk, and these were basically primary goods. They used to export from India, and in return the same products, the primary products, they convert into secondary or finished products, and India used to import from England the same products. So the first thing was India used to export raw materials or primary goods and import finished goods. So this way the economy can never develop. If we are exporting only raw materials and importing finished goods, and the country or the economy becomes dependent on the country. So as the first point, the foreign trade, exporter of primary products or importer of finished goods. So Indian economy became an exclusive exporter of primary products and importer of finished goods. That's the foreign trade policy. The second point, monopoly control of British rules. So their motive was very selfish motive, monopoly control. You know what the Britishers did was, they made it mandatory to export all half of the foreign trade from India to England. That means India had to export half of their primary raw materials to England to develop their industries there. And the remaining half they can export to few countries like Sri Lanka, Persia, we used to call Iran that time. That means they had complete monopoly power over our foreign trade. So second point, monopoly control of British rule. More than half of India's foreign trade used to be with England or British. And then the second point under monopoly control, in 1869 they opened the Suez Canal, which had a direct link from UK, United Kingdom, Britain to England. That really helped the foreign trade from India and England. That means through Suez Canal, they used to take our raw materials easily and used to get the finished goods from there instead of taking a long route. That is another point. Monopoly control of British rule. More than half of India's foreign trade used to take place with Britain. Suez Canal in 1869, direct link between India and Britain. And the last point you have in the foreign trade, drain of Indian wealth. The Indian wealth, the drain, that means they exploited. So we used to supply so much raw materials to the industries in England, so there used to be export surplus. So the export surplus which they are supposed to use for development of the country, no, they exploited even that. What did they do with the export surplus or the wealth they generated by exporting raw materials to England? They used it in war expenses during the Second World War, during the First World War, and England had many wars. So during those wars, they used the wealth accumulated in India. So that is the drain of Indian wealth. And the second point, to import invisible items. Invisible items mean services. So Britishers used to import a lot of services from many parts of the world, or even though their people used to come to India, so to work in India. So they used to pay salaries from our wealth. And the last point you have, office expenses. Britishers established so many offices all over India. So unfortunately, we have to pay for those expenses. That is the drain of India's wealth. So the foreign trade policy during the British rule was not very good, because the main motive of the British rule was exploitation. Under this you have the first point, the Britishers' rule foreign trade policy was only to help their industries. That's why all the exports from India were only primary goods and imports were secondary goods. That means India used to export raw materials and used to import finished goods. The second point is monopoly control over the foreign policy of India. So the Britishers put controls. More than half of our trade used to take place with England or Britain, the remaining with other countries such as Iran and Sri Lanka. And the last point, they drained Indian wealth to pay expenses for their war expenses and to pay money for the staff they recruited in India and to pay for invisible items, that is services, which they are utilizing. So once again you see here, explain the state of foreign trade during the British rule. Exporter of primary products and importer of finished goods. 2. Monopoly control of British rule. Under this you write, half of the trade used to take place with England, and Suez Canal, they opened it in 1869, that really helped to grow the trade with England. And drain of Indian wealth, the third point, under this you can write, war expenses were met by India and to import invisible items from England and all their office expenses. So we read it here, keep looking at this. Explain the state of India's foreign trade during the British rule. The state of India's foreign trade during the British rule is discussed as below. The first point you have exporter of primary products and importer of finished goods. India became an exporter of primary products such as raw silk, cotton, wool, sugar, indigo, jute, etc., and an importer of finished consumer goods like cotton, silk, and woolen clothes, and capital goods like light machinery products produced in the British industries. So that means basically India was an exporter of primary goods and importer of finished goods. And the second major point is, under the foreign trade policy, monopoly control of British rule. British government maintained a monopoly control over India's exports and imports. Under this you have the first point, more than half of India's foreign trade was restricted to Britain, while the rest was allowed with few other countries like China, Ceylon, now we call it as Sri Lanka, and Persia, now we call it as Iran. And the third point, under this you have monopoly control of British rule. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 served as a direct route for the ships operating between India and Britain. That really helped to have a lot of trade with Britain. And the last point, you have drain of India's wealth during British rule. Under the British rule, India became an exporter of primary products, raw materials, and an importer of finished goods. There was huge export surplus due to excess exports. However, export surplus was used A. to make payments for expenses incurred by an office set up by the colonial government in Britain. 2. to meet expenses on wars fought by the British government to import invisible items. That's all we have time for today's video. Till we meet next time, it's goodbye from Saddam Hussein. Don't forget to share and subscribe. Work hard and keep smiling. Bye-bye.